Hi everyone, it's Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore here, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. So this is my regular Thursday series where I talk about making music, talk about the different things that go into creating music. And if you check out the link that I've hopefully pinned up to the top there, that's where all my courses are on teaching about music, the basic theory course, the harmony course, the counterpoint course, etc. So we've been working on talking about modes and things this month. And I'd like to again welcome everyone here, the newcomers as well as the regulars here. Yeah, I've got a couple pieces queued up here that I'm really excited to talk about because they got some interesting things going on that allow me to, talk about different aspects about the use of what modes are about. It's a big topic, and there's a lot of things to talk about, and it's one that's a lot of people haven't really experienced. So it's really I don't know, it's fun for me to be able to show these different things and introduce people to these different ideas. And so the piece that I want to start off looking at here, so by the way, I did allude to the fact in the newsletter that there's going to be a special event coming up it's 2 weeks from today. I still don't have the confirmation that I need on the details to be able to talk more, but in principle, it's a free workshop that I'll be doing to talk about harmony, not about modal harmony like we're going to be talking about today, but about conventional tonal harmony, and in particular applications of the conventional techniques that have been around since the days of Bach, but how that is applied to today's music, whether you're talking about pop songs or jazz or just modern classical music that's trying to be in a somewhat tonal vein as opposed to modern atonal music. So that's what the workshop's going to be about. And so yeah, I'll hopefully have more details to share soon. All right, so what I'm going to do here is, Samuel Halbertsma, has written this really cool piece that we're going to listen to and talk about. So as you're listening, I want to be thinking about what it means to say that this piece is modal. Because when I say that there's some things that we typically do or don't do in modal music, one of the things that people often think is a thing to do, and questions have come up. Sora's asked about it, Trevor has asked about it, and I want to show a little of one of Trevor's pieces later too. What doesn't typically happen is saying, hey, I'm going to be in the key of G Phrygian, and now I'm going to use, so this is G Phrygian. What we don't tend to do is write pieces that use those exact chords. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm not saying people haven't done it, but historically, that's not what it meant to use Phrygian. And, it's something that people experiment with, that type of thinking now, but it's just not the norm. Now, what is the norm now is this very different sensation that you're going to get with this piece. This isn't picking one mode and then using different chords within it. What you're going to see is every single chord is going to imply a new mode. So it's like every chord is a new scale, basically. This is the way a lot of jazz uses modes, so that each chord might only last one measure, might last 4 measures, might last 8 measures, might only last 2 beats. But the idea that each chord comes from a new scale. If you think about tonal music, yeah, we're writing I don't know why that's the piece on my mind. It's got 2 different chords there then. Something like that. I haven't really played the piece in decades. But it had a C chord, an F chord, and a G chord, but they're all in the key of C. So yes, it's got multiple chords, but they're all outlining the key of C. The thing with modal music, and what we're going to hear in Sam's piece here in a moment, is, yeah, there's different chords, but the different chords don't all come from the same key. They come from different keys and not major keys. They're Lydian keys and other types of scales. And every time the chord changes, the scale changes too. Maybe not every single time, but that's kind of the defining feature of modal music that it is as it's applied to this particular type of modal music in jazz. I'm not talking Renaissance modal music, totally different vibe there. But this is a way that chords are very typically used in jazz, in modal music. So all of that said, let's switch over. I'm going to go in continuous view so we can just sort of watch the music here. I got repeats off because we're just going to hear the pieces and then go. So here we go. Nice, Sam. That is, yeah, cooks right along is a great way of putting it. That is a beautiful wonderful piece. That's a great example of some of the things that I want to be talking about. I do see a question about adjusting gauges, and I'm not sure, translation-wise what that's about. My guess is that was a question about how to use MuseScore, which is probably a better question to be asking in the MuseScore Cafe or on the support forums. But if someone can come up with a good translation of what is actually being asked, we can, see if it's relevant to anything I can talk about. So there's a number of big picture things I want to talk about, and then some kind of detail-oriented things. So big picture-wise, the form of this piece. I'm going to go back to page view here, and actually, I guess even though we don't necessarily need to be seeing all my keystrokes, I might as well be showing them. The overall form here is a typical one that happens in a jazz piece, which is really related to the classical sonata form. We have an exposition of our main theme, and that main theme might itself have two subsidiary themes. There might be an A theme and a B theme, but there's our exposition, which is the main statement of the theme, and then there's a development section where we play with those ideas. In a classical sense, we'd mostly be taking that melodic material and doing different things with. In a jazz setting, what we do is we start with that harmonic framework. We start with that same chord progression and then improvise new melodies. And then we have a recapitulation where we restate the theme. And maybe there's an introduction. So in Sam's piece here, this is all introduction. This is just introduction. We haven't started the piece, right? We've started the piece, but we haven't started the main theme yet. So the main theme doesn't come in until A1 here, really, when the horns come in. And so this is where the main theme is. And now one thing that I noticed that I didn't notice right away, but I'm seeing now, I noticed it during halfway through the piece, is that the horns here are transposed. Right, so the trumpet and I guess tenor saxophone are in unison here, or in octaves anyhow, but they're written at their pitch. So in other words, the trumpet we see as C sharp notated, and the tenor sax we see as C sharp notated. And when I saw that against this G7, I was like, wait a minute, that should be Lydian dominant there. I should be hearing this, and I didn't hear the Lydian dominant sound. That was my first clue that the brass part, that the horn parts were transposed. That's really written C sharp. I'm going to turn on concert pitch so we can see now the written, that we can see the sounding pitches, and we realize that really is just a beat. Now, one thing you may or may not know is that usually when we turn on concert pitch, if we have transposing instruments, the key signatures transpose also. And that's the norm. If you write a piece in the key of C, then the trumpets would be in the key of D, and they would have two sharps in their key signature. But when you're writing music like this, there is no key. It's, as I said, each chord suggests its own sort of tonal center. It keeps shifting. So rather than using key signatures, we use what's called the atonal key signature. And so in the key signature palette here, you see this one with an X through it? That's the open or atonal key signature. And basically it works just like C. You don't see any sharps or flats, but it doesn't add sharps or flats when you transpose. That's what that key signature is for. And a whole ton of this kind of music is written with that key signature, because we're going to have transposing instruments, we're going to have trumpets and saxophones, but there is no key. It's not in the key of C. It's just there is no key. So we don't write a key signature, and we just use accidentals everywhere we need it. So using the X, the open atonal key signature, allows us to get that. All right, so so then we have our melody here, and the melody is over G7, and then it changes to B flat 7, right? I mean to F7, then E minor 7, and then more chords. And then that's basically the A theme, then some extra measures. And now we're going to hear that theme again. Same theme again. That helps me play that. second A theme. Now we have our B theme. As I said, just like in a classical sonata, a lot of jazz melodies really have two separate themes. So here's the second theme, the B theme. It starts with an F sharp here, concert F sharp. And then back to the A theme again. So the form of this, as far as the melody, is A, A, B, A. We have our A theme, and then we have our B theme that we just heard, and now is a return to the A theme. Exactly the same A theme we heard before. And the only difference between the A themes is how it ends, right? One of them ends on a question mark, one ends on a period, that kind of thing. So we typically, if you think about how it would go with lyrics, so typically in that sort of form, A, B, A, the A's are identical except for the last two measures, because usually maybe the first A theme is designed to transition you back to the second A theme, but the second A theme is designed to transition you into the bridge, into the B theme. So the last couple of chords will often be different. So that is the basic form, AABA, for the head, as we call it in jazz, exposition, as we call it in classical and sonata form. Then the piano solo comes in on that same chord progression. So it's going to be that same chord progression of AABA, but there's a piano solo. And this would normally be improvised. And I can't help myself, but I want to improvise on this thing. So I'm going to, because by gosh, it's my show and I can do what I want to. I'm going to improvise on this because I want to because it's fun, and point out that what we hear the pianist doing here, this is meant to sort of emulate what a pianist would have improvised. And so Sam wrote something so that the playback in MuseScore would do something reasonable, but my guess is he doesn't mean this to be what a pianist would play. A pianist would actually improvise at this point. So I'm going to play out that last A section and then improvise. The music loud enough to be in time with it very well. So I'm guessing that I'm not very in time with it, but that's okay. You get the idea. I'm just making my known new melody over that chord progression. That's development section, or in jazz, the solo section. And I just did that because it was so fun. I wanted to improvise on it. And the thing is, it's actually quite challenging. Well, first of all, like I said, thanks for the kind words there. And I'm way out of practice. And I'm sight reading. and I'm sight reading something where I can't actually see what's happening because it's like scrolling as it goes by, and I don't know what the next chord is going to be, and it's actually hard for me to predict the next chord because it's not following standard patterns. So when I'm improvising, I'm like, oh my gosh, what's that next chord going to be? Now at this point, I've seen and heard that chord progression enough that I think I have it memorized. So eyes closed. E minor, and then A minor. But I think that's where it differs between the A section. So I'm kind of learning the chord progression as I go. And one of the skills that you develop in jazz is the skill of learning the chord progression your first time through the tune. So by the time, or the first or second time through the tune, so that by the time you are soloing, you don't have to be looking at the music. That's what you want to be happening. So the thing is, when I say it's hard to predict the chord progression, it's because they're not 2-5-1s. They are this modal thing going on. And so now is when I want to get into those details of talking about what's happening here. So the chord progression starts right here, G7. And he writes it G7 add 4. I might say G7 sus, except his voicing in the piano is built on fourths, which is a really common thing in this style of music. Because although we're dealing with chords, we don't want them to sound too triadic. We don't want them to sound like Bach used chords. We don't want them to sound like Beethoven used chords. We don't want that sound because then we're going to expect them to resolve the way they use those sounds. This G7 would normally resolve to C. If this was tonal music, if I had a G7, I'd expect a C to come next. That's what normally happens. And so if I voice the chord this way, I'm setting up an expectation of that. So we don't do that in this music. I'm not saying we'll never voice a chord that way. I'm not saying we never voice chords in thirds, but very often in this style of music where we want to have this ambiguity to the chord, I want it to sound like G7, but I want it to sound like a G7 that doesn't need to go to C. That's the trick here. I want it to sound like G7, but not sound like it needs to go to C. So voicing in fourths does that. And whoever discovered this, I mean, I don't know who originally discovered it. McCoy Tyner in the 60s is the person who popularized this notion. I don't know if he single-handedly invented it. No, he couldn't have invented it because chordal harmonies were a thing and Hindemith and all, but how to apply it to this kind of music, McCoy Tyner, I'll just give him credit because he was especially good at it and popularized it for sure. So it's built on fourths. In this case, perfect fourth, then augmented fourth. But then the voicing moves down here to all perfect fourths and then moves there. So it's moving. And that's a typical thing of how we use these voicings. We move them around so that it doesn't feel static. We don't, even though the chord lasts for 4 measures, I don't want to hear just this for 4 measures because that's too static. I want it to feel like the harmonies are moving, even though they're not. Oh gosh, thank you for telling me about my keyboard being that, because now I know exactly, it was the same thing as last time, and I need to remember to change my microphone. I'm so sorry about that. So change microphone, because I've got a, not a good microphone, but a better microphone set up. Thank you for pointing that out. So I'm now switching to my better microphone. Up. So now there's also a rattle on the piano because there's a loose screw somewhere in the lid, and that's like the bane of all pianos, I think. So hopefully that was better. So let me know if, in fact, I can look at my levels. I can look at my levels. It's still a little hot, right? All right. Okay, So it's louder than my voice, but not much louder than my voice. I think that's probably better. So yeah, so sorry about that. What happened is by default, it's using my overhead camera microphone, which is terrible, right? And so I've got, I'll show you what I got because I like it. It's fun. This is 30 bucks at Target. It's a Target brand USB microphone that in my test sounds like almost as good as my $200 microphone. So, you know, what the heck. And it's light as a feather and sets up in a moment. So, oh, I just unplugged it. There we go. But it's got a loose cable, so I need to switch back to it. So that's what I get for picking it up in the middle of the stream. Now what? Okay, there we go. Okay, there we go. So if it's still distorted for you, or did it just go back to distorted when I picked up the mic and accidentally unplugged it? Hopefully that sounds better, but I guess I can turn down more. The mic is sitting on the piano, but it's sitting on some socks, and the socks are my audio cushioning. So this is my portable setup, which is not as sophisticated, but generally does the job. Okay, so glad to hear it. All right, so sorry for the little technical thing there, but you know, that's always life, right? So this idea of using these fourths moving around is how we get this sense of ambiguity and motion. We want it to feel like that G7 chord isn't just sitting there doing nothing for 4 bars. But on the other hand, we don't want to introduce new harmonies, and we don't want it to feel too much like it needs to resolve, and fourths just do that for us. So we create this voicing built on fourths and move it around to give us our motion, and then when we switch to the F7 chord, we do the same thing. Okay, so yeah, sorry if my previous improvisation all right. All right, back, yes. There's me playing, and here's MuseScore playing. Through my wrong speaker too. So yep, it's gonna be just one of those days of it says it's but let's actually output to my AirPod, shall we? All right. All right, sorry about that. These things happen. But I'm getting better at seeing when it's happening because now I know what to be looking for. So I hopefully won't be gone long periods of time without immediately getting on fixing it. Okay, so I've talked about the voicings there. Now let's talk about the chords themselves, because I said that they're not predictable. Well, what's happening here is G7 add 4. So I mentioned that I usually call that G7 sus. And because G7 and then G7 sus means basically a suspended fourth. It means we're replacing the third with a fourth. But the way Sam has it voiced actually includes the third very prominently because it's in the melody, right? Da, do, da, do, da, da. Yeah. So his melody very prominently has the third. So calling it G7 sus is a little bit of a lie. I will say we often do that anyhow, but calling it G7 add 4 is fine too, or G7 sus add 3 for that matter. Something that lets us know that unlike some sus chords on this one, it's okay to have the third. I would claim that's always okay in this kind of music, this kind of modal music like this. We might expect that. So anyhow, this is implying a Mixolydian scale. And that's exactly what he's written out here. Mixolydian, and include the third and the fourth. No avoid notes. Because usually if we're playing over G7, we try to avoid the C. We just treat it as a passing tone. But now we can sit on it. I use the C a lot over G7 sus. So, but then the next scale is F7 add 4. So now it's F Mixolydian. And then the next scale is E Dorian. Right? And these three chords have nothing to do with each other. I mean, there's a nice stepwise motion that's happening in the bass, the roots, but the chords themselves, there's no key that they come from, right? G7, we know, normally occurs as the 5 chord in the key of C, or maybe A minor as the, flat 7 chord. But then the next chord, F7, puts the lie to that, because that chord doesn't appear normally in the key of C or in the key of A minor. And so we think, oh, well, maybe we are in C, and that's just sort of a borrowed, whatever, borrowing it from the melodic minor, or it's a blues thing, I don't know. But then we come to this E minor, and E minor is in the key of C, but very explicitly we're using C sharps. And I say explicitly, his melody doesn't have C sharps, but as jazz musicians, that's what we assume. We see E minor 7. We don't say, hey, I'm in the key of C, therefore I'm not going to use, I'm going to use white notes. If I was in the key of C, I might be using Fs and C over that chord. But because I'm not thinking about key of C, I'm thinking each chord one at a time, I'm using F sharp. And he has it right there in his melody. And if he ever got around to it, he would have a C sharp there too. And perhaps in his improvised piano solo, he may have it going on. So, and then we have A Dorian. And the melody is just a dotted half note, right? So the melody isn't necessarily saying Dorian, but A minor 7, just the chord symbol itself will tell any jazz musician who is familiar with this type of music that, you see minor 7, use Dorian. You see dominant 7th with no alterations, use Mixolydian, etc. Use major 7. I could either use major here with a B flat or Lydian. And it's sort of my choice at that point. And because I've been using a lot of B naturals so far, right? All these other scales, most of them had B natural. This one had a B flat, but then the next 3 all had had B naturals. So then I'll probably hang on that B because I just had it on the previous chord, and I'm about to have it on the next chord. The next chord is Lydian. And he's indicating that by, well, first of all, by writing it in, but in the chord symbol, writing major 7 sharp 4. He wrote +4. Sometimes +4 is used for that. Usually I use sharp 4, but it's or sharp 11 actually is what I would normally call that. G major 7 sharp 11, but it's basically a G major 7 chord with the 1, 2, 3, 4th sharped. That's G major 7 sharp 11, and it implies a Lydian scale. So when I get here, I would use the Lydian scale even without being told. Just from seeing that chord symbol, I know to use Lydian. Now he does another thing that's really typical in this style here. This, I muted the piano part, but if we look at what's going on, this is perfectly good Lydian, right? These are all notes that are from Lydian, and they're fourths, but with a third on top. That's another typical jazz voicing. Fourths, but with a third on top. It comes from So What? Miles Davis piece, So What? And it's a stack of fourths with a third on top. So that sound is also a big part of the vocabulary here. So he's got these fourths with a third on top, but then he takes that whole shape and just moves it up a half step and then back down again. This is how we create little tension release within that chord. I said we're not going to have a whole chord progression. We're not going to have a whole Lydian chord progression. We want to create motion, and sometimes we use it just by moving our fourths through the scale, but sometimes we feel like that's not creating enough motion. So we do this thing of going up a half step, which creates tension. Because now, if the rest of the band is still playing Lydian, and I'm playing that, that's extra tense now. So we don't hold on to it, we just play it and then go up and come back down. That's a real typical sound. It's called side slipping. So all these terms that I'm talking about how we treat them in jazz improvisation, but again, they're not limited to jazz. You can totally write, and this is written out. This is all, every single note was written here. Until I started improvising, there was no improvisation, right? You can use these sounds in fully composed music, through composed music, we would call it. So that idea of taking a sound and then moving it up a half step and back down, totally, you're welcome to use that anytime you want. And then in the next A section, it's kind of the same thing, but I did want to show the couple of chords that were different. At the end of the second A section, he goes to this B flat major 7, sharp 11. So instead of ending after that F by coming back to G, he goes to B flat major sharp 11. So now I know, again, it's Lydian. Because when I see that chord symbol, I know Lydian. And going forward, the bridge, okay, major 7, and that major 7 could either be just plain major or it could be Lydian. You kind of get your choice there. And I'll be, if we look at his written out solo, I would see which chord he used on, which scale he used on the bridge. But and then it goes to an F major 7. So again, same story. I could either use major or Lydian. But then he's got another chord here, G major 7 +4 +5, which again doesn't mean add, it means sharp. So G major 7, sharp 11, sharp 5. Sharp 5 and sharp 11. That chord there is another very typical jazz sound. I say very typical, post 1960 anyhow. Major 7th chord, a major 7th chord, but with an augmented 5th and a sharp 11. And it's this sound is the scale that's associated with that. And we learn all the different scales that are associated with these chords when you learn how to improvise in this style. This is the actual George Russell scale called Lydian Augmented, and that's one of his, like, if he has a list of 6 primary scales, that's number 2 on the list after Lydian. So Lydian is this. Lydian Augmented is that. So it's major, but with a sharp 4 and sharp 5. And so that's the scale that goes with that chord. And so, yeah, you learn the different scales that go with the different chords, and those become your improvising tools. And then we have just a plain A is to use either Mixolydian or Lydian dominant, because actually it's A7 over G. So it's really a G. It's this set of notes here, starting with G, or you could think of it as starting on A. So yeah, so there's a whole like charts full of which scales go with, and it's not like someone arbitrarily picked a scale to go with a chord. We pick the scales that go with chords based on the fact that it has those notes in it. You look at what notes are actually in an A7 chord, and then you connect the dots. Well, what passing tone would I want between this A and the C sharp? B makes sense. What passing tone would I want between the C sharp and the E? Well, I could either put a D or an E there. What passing tone would I want between this G, this E, and that G? Well, it could either be the F or the F sharp. So that's where you get different scale choices. It's a question of, well, you want the chord tones in there, and then you fill in the passing tones differently, and that gives you different scale choices for different for like you get 3 different scale choices for one chord that way. So that again is just a really good classic textbook example of application of all that stuff, and it sounds great. So great job, Sam, and great job giving me something to talk about that's exactly in line with some of what I would have wanted to talk about, which is, you know, what it actually means to use these different modes. So now we're not just talking about the modes of, you know, the Renaissance modes. We're talking about things like Lydian dominant. Oh, which, by the way, I mentioned that last week. It's actually a mode of not Lydian dominant, sorry, Lydian augmented. This scale here is related to E, melodic minor, which is true, but not really that relevant. It doesn't really help to think about E melodic minor when you're trying to improvise over a G chord, but they do happen to have the same notes. G, Lydian augmented, is the same notes as E melodic minor. So the modes, the historic modes, plus including Locrian, which is not really part of history, was sort of tacked on later to fill out the chart. And then, but the modes of melodic minor are a big part of the jazz vocabulary as well. So yeah, so that's the stuff that's going on here. And yeah, there were a couple places where I was like saying, you know, if I looked at the improvisation, I would figure out for sure exactly which scale. Sam was thinking in different places. You know, if I looked hard enough. But yeah, again, there's choices for some of these, and then you get to pick which one you want. And so now, Trevor, I'm glad that you stepped in and said something here, because I want to contrast this, not contrast like Sam's piece is great, your piece is great, but I want to contrast what's different about them. In Sam's piece, every chord, like I said, has its own scale. When I'm playing E minor 7 or E minor 11, I'm thinking Dorian, E Dorian. When I get to this chord, I'm thinking A Dorian. When I get to this scale, this chord, I'm thinking F major or F Lydian. The G major 7 was F Lydian or G Lydian. The G7 was G Mixolydian. The G major 7 sharp 5, sharp 11 was G Lydian augmented. A different scale for every chord. There's not an overall sense of this piece is in Lydian, and all the chords come from that. So changing up the vibe entirely, we're going to look at Trevor's C minor lament here. So so thanks again, Sam, and thanks for the comments there. Yeah, great job, Sam. All right, so Trevor's piece is fantastic too. Totally different vibe, and we're just going to play it through. It's not all that long, and then this is an example of doing the thing that I said isn't that commonly done, except it's done. You know, people do it because you can. But historically, this isn't the thing. But Sora, this will maybe seem familiar to you also, because it relates to some of the things that you were doing in your pieces, using Phrygian as a tonal center. So C Phrygian is this set of notes. It's C natural minor, but with the second flat. And Trevor, you mentioned Locrian, but if it was Locrian, it would have had G flats, and you pretty much don't have G flats. You got G naturals, like right from the very beginning. You got a C minor triad. So this basically uses these notes more or less throughout the piece. In fact, just for grins, I just want to make a little observation here, and then we'll hear it. I'm going to add a flat to the key signature. And now you will see there's very few accidentals that remain. There's like this little chromatic melody, and yes, chromatic melodies are going to need accidentals, but a whole lot of the rest of the piece becomes diatonic. There's a, an accidental here, that same B natural there. There's an E natural. There are accidentals still, but most of the Ds were D flats. I don't see any D naturals. I don't see any D naturals in here, because I would have to see a D with a natural sign on it, right? There's like one used as a passing tone here, one used as a passing tone here. Well, I guess this is an actual chord tone, because at this point I think it's modulated to B flat. So I'm going to undo that change and just point out that that first whole section of the piece really is in that as a key. So it's got a C minor tonic chord and a D flat major chord also that kind of wants to come back to C minor. So enough talking. Let's hear the song. Yeah, Beautiful, Trevor. And yeah, I'm sorry my computer was not able to keep up in the middle there. It relates probably to the pedal thing that I talked about in Peter's piece yesterday during the cafe, if you caught that. That when there's a lot of notes with the pedal down, MuseScore synthesizer gets overloaded. You all will be happy to know, last night I ordered a faster computer, and it will help with some things, but stuff like that MuseScore is going to struggle with no matter what. A lot of notes with pedal down. So that's just unfortunate. All right, so yeah, beautiful, beautiful, Trevor. And so when I talk about this from that modal perspective, the fact that it starts off with this C minor chord, and then D flat chord, and then D flat again, but this time with F in the bass, except maybe it's F minor, right? And so that chord, this chord here, a D flat triad with an F in the bass, that's the Neapolitan from a classical perspective. So that's what it's called, that flatted 2 chord, almost always in first inversion like that. It's a variation on F minor. So you could have 1 and then 4 and then 5 and then 1. That's a typical type of chord progression. But going to flat 2 instead. This is 4, minor 4, right? F minor, that's flat 2. And then, that's not really how that goes exactly. That chord is called the Neapolitan. And so if the piece had then done what I would expect it to do, of going to 5 and then back to 1, I'd say, oh, he just used the Neapolitan, and that's fine. But he really does not that, because he does go to kind of a 5 chord, but it's a 5 chord with a B flat, not a B natural. And then later on, he goes directly to F minor. Elsewhere, he goes directly from that D flat chord to C minor. So he's basically not just using that D flat chord in this classical Neapolitan way. He's using that D flat chord as an honest to goodness member of the key. So that's why I say, yeah, the piece is really in C Phrygian, at least at the beginning. Yeah, it goes other places, it modulates, and the whole middle section is just going all over the place in kind of romantic style. But for a very long time, the piece very much feels, this section right here. Okay, we land on A flat major, which is like the relative major of C Phrygian, because they both have the same key signature, as Trevor says, the same key signature as F minor. We have an A flat major, A flat major, A flat major, and now C minor. But C minor with that D flat. It's that total Phrygian sound there. But then he kind of goes from there and moves to G minor and starts doing other things. Now it feels like we're in G minor, right? And now here's that D flat triad going directly to C minor. So yeah, still feels like we're in C minor. Now the big part in C minor. So yeah, there's definitely a sense of C being a tonal center, but that D flat is being more than just an occasional thing. It's like a real thing. And this section, by the way, also reminds me, Trevor, you mentioned during Sam's piece, the Hemiola thing. So let me just talk about that word because it's also in your piece, of course. Hemiola is the idea of writing a rhythm that doesn't fit the time signature. That's really the most general description I could give of it. And so usually we think of it as a piece that's in 3. Where I did 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Then I did 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. In other words, I broke it up, right? Instead of going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, I went 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So that the feel of it felt like I was in 2/4 for a moment. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2 is 2 beats, then 3, 1 is 2 beats, and then 2, 3 is 2 beats, and then you land again. So that's sort of the original Chopin hemiola that he used all the time in his waltzes. But anything where you write a pattern that sort of crosses the measure in a funny way or crosses the bar line in a funny way, we can call a hemiola. So in the jazz waltz that Sam had going there, that's all over the place in these, you know, the way these rhythms. At this point, you can't tell that I'm not in 2 because you don't hear that 3 underneath it anymore. It just feels like quarter notes. But if I go bum 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 bum, it's really a polyrhythm more than hemiola as far as that goes. But it's all related concept. And if you rewrote the time signature, it would be a hemiola by the classical definition. So that idea, which, okay, so just to go yet another place with it, this became a thing for Dave Brubeck to have a piece that was a waltz. 1, 2, 3, and then he would start voicing it. I'm not in 3 anymore. I'm in 2. I'm in 4. But the drums would keep playing in 3, and Brubeck would be doing all this jazz piano 4/4 stuff on top of the drums and bass playing in 3. That's like the ultimate example of that sort of thing. So anyhow, Trevor has that sort of thing going here. Bum, 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 and then oh, it's not here. It's later on. I'm telling a little lie. It's right here that it kind of really happens. Nope, it's not there either. Where is it, Trevor? Oh, well, I see it here, but there was like a more extended passage of it. It's a little later on then, right? But wherever it happens, he's got this left-hand pattern that, I can see it here. So I'm going to look at this version right here. So he has 1, 2, 3, bum, bum, right? Is that like, yeah, that's that clef, right? Okay. And then 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It feels like we're in 3 or 6/8, but we're in 3. We're really in this. So, da, 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 da. That's the actual count, but against it, he has 1, 2, 3, and 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So he's got like the left hand is like it's in 6/8, where this is the downbeat. So the downbeat of the left hand is in the cracks between the downbeat of the right hand. So it's essentially the exact same thing that Sam had going, where the piano was doing these dotted quarters while the rest of the band was in 3. Trevor's got basically the opposite. The rest of the band's in 3, and the left hand of the piano has the these are basically dotted quarters, right? Dotted quarter, dotted quarters. It's split into thirds. So yeah, totally the right kind of right kind of a thing. So anyhow, yeah, the whole middle section of this goes into other areas, and that's the section where I couldn't, MuseScore's playback wasn't keeping up with me well enough to say what was happening. But just because I kind of want to hear that section again, I'm going to do the same thing I did with Peters. I'm just going to remove all of the pedal markings on the assumption that that's going to, and here's more of that hemiola. So, and then he even changes key signature to something with a lot of flats. So yeah, great piece, Trevor, and love it a lot. And yeah, it allowed me to talk about something having to do with modal approaches to harmony. So, so thanks for asking about that. And fantastic piece overall. I'm sorry that my computer isn't up to snuff on this, but I'll be curious to see if I try playing it next week if it behaves any better. So I'm going to get moving along is what I'm trying to say. Got more classes to teach this afternoon. So I want to thank everyone for being here for the Music Masterclass today. Next week, we're going to continue doing what we're doing here, but I very likely want to move to that new Circle streaming platform. Whether that happens next week, I might transition. I might start on YouTube and then move over. We're going to kind of play it by ear next week. Depends on a couple of things, like what happens with the new computer and all. But in any case, we are going forward going to be using that new Circle live streaming platform that we used for the extra session of the cafe last week. So stay tuned for that. There's going to be some exciting things that happen, like it make really easy for me to bring you guys on board to talk to me about your pieces. So thanks everyone for being here. And again, stay tuned in a couple weeks. I hope to be doing a workshop and you'll be hearing more about that as soon as I have the actual news to share with you. So thanks everyone.